Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Terumos, Chapter 4, Halacha 2. This is a very short one on the Artsborough on 34b1. Today, we're going to be getting into an issue of Breira. Not only with Breira, but is there going to be Breira for Doraita laws? Are you going to use Breira just for Derabanan laws? Are you not going to use Breira? How would Breira work? And the case that we're going to get into is somebody has to go separate tithes, and some of the tithes are prescribed. In other words, you know that for Meiser Rishon, it's going to be 10% after you separate out the Truma Gedola. And okay, so 10%, no problem. So what happens if you are doing like what we talked about in the last Mishnah, where you took out half of the tithes now and you're going to take out half of the tithes later, and then somebody ate the tithes, and now what? In other words, it doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. Do you have to go out and separate it again? Or are you going to say, because of Breira, retroactively, I could just take out the rest of the tithes and it'll count even though it doesn't exist in the world? That's going to be a big question. In other words, does the whole thing have to still exist? So the Mishnah started off, and it says that regarding somebody whose untithed produce was in the storeroom, and he gave a sa'ah to a Levi as Meiser Rishon, and a sa'ah to a poor person as a Meiser Ani, he may separate another 8 sa'ah from the pile and eat it, regardless of whether the tithe still exists, for the 8 sa'ah has been rectified by the 2. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. In other words, Rabbi Meir is saying that, look, you did what you did in the last Mishnah, right? You started it off in a part, and you had the intention to do the rest of it. And so you had a poor person in front of you now, and you gave one part to him, and you gave another part to someone else, and you know that you have 8 left to tithe. But this guy ate his, and this guy ate his, and when you go and you finish the process, even though these 2 aren't in the world anymore, they're gone, did you finish it? Did that act get completed or not? Or do you still owe another 2? It's like as if you didn't tithe anything. And the sages say about this that he may separate from the pile only in the portion of the tithes that still exist. In other words, what the sages are saying, as explained by the Rambam, is that to the sages, you can't consume the 8 sa'ah from the pile unless the 2 sa'ah that he removed are still in the world. In other words, it's still in existence. And as long as those 2 sa'ah are still in existence, you can separate the rest of the 8. And that's not a problem. But the problem is if the tithes don't exist anymore, they were destroyed, they were burnt, they were eaten, then the 8 sa'ah is going to have to be rectified before it can be consumed. And if part of the 2 sa'ah of tithes still exists, he can separate and consume a measure of produce from the pile in proportion to the tithes that exist. And the sages are basically ruling that because they do not apply the principle of Breira in matters of biblical law, Doraita, and by the way, you can find this in Bavli Beitza 38a as well, that when the 8 sa'ah was removed from the pile and rectified by the tithes designated earlier, the rectification does not take effect retroactively. In other words, you still owe another 2. In other words, they're saying that Doraita, you have to take out 10% of the remaining produce after your Truma Gedola, and you have to take out the 10% of the Meiser Rishon. And basically by, doing part of it now and part of it later and part of it's gone now, it's not, you only separated 8 out of 10. And you have to separate 10 out of 10. And so it's like you didn't complete the act. You underdid it. And what's the problem with that? Well, the Torah says the specific amount that you're supposed to designate out for the Meiser Rishon. And they're saying there is no Breira on this Doraita thing or any Doraita thing. And basically, you can't separate out 80% of it. You have to separate out, 100% of it. In other words, 10 out of 10, 10% of the remainder. And so we're seeing here really a maloka between Rabbi Meir and the sages is, hey, is Beur going to count, Breira's retroactive designation, is that going to count for a Doraita thing or not. Rabbi Meir is basically saying that you already took out 2, and now you're taking out 8. That adds up to 10, and guess what? If 2 are gone from the world, we already took it out, and retroactively you add the extra 8 later, and okay, it adds up to 10 retroactively. The sages say, no. Those 2 are burnt, they're gone. And now that you're taking out 8, the other 2 don't exist, well, you only took out 8%, not 10%. So that's the deep point. Now, there's going to be a parallel between this Mishnah and the Mishnah in Demai, where it's talking about a worker who separates out tithes from the ration of his figs. And over there in Demai 7.3, the Mishnah is talking about a worker who gets from his employer 99 figs as their daily ration to eat. And the produce is going to be Demai, and it has to be tithed. And basically the case over there was going to be the owner of the field is going to be Am Haaretz, and the worker is going to be a Haver who separates his tithes. So the labor sets aside the necessary tithes, and then he can eat freely for the pile. And for whatever he eats is going to be retroactively separated the moment he separates out tithes. And basically the question is over there, in the case of Demai, which is D'Rabbanan, hey, is Breira going to work over there? And over here, we have a case where, hey, wait a second, no, this is Doraita. This is not, Demai that we're talking about. So Rabbi Lazar says in this Gemara that in the name of Rabbi Hoshaya regarding a person that we're talking about in the Mishnah over in Demai, that the rabbis treated him like a laborer who does not trust his employer regarding tithes, and therefore separates tithes from his daily ration of figs before removing the ration itself from the pile. And in that case where the pile is Demai and the requirement to tithe is just going to be rabbinic, the Mishnah is ruling that when he removes his ration from the pile, the tithes take effect retroactively. And the same applies in our case as well. Although the produce here is going to be actual tevel, right? And that way, the tithing requirement is going to be Doraita. It's biblical. And then over here, the question is that tithe going to take effect retroactively? So Rabbi Lazar is basically saying that Rabbi Meir permits the 8 sa'ah even in the absence of the other 2 for Breira in matters of biblical law. And this is really the subject of dispute. And over there in Demai, which is going to be D'Rabbanan, everybody agrees that the tithes separate retroactively earlier for the laborer's ration is going to be a rabbinic obligation. And they're going to say that, okay, the principle of Breira there is going to apply because it's rabbinic. But Rabbi Lazar is basically implying that where the obligation is going to be a biblical one, that maybe the tithes can also take effect just like that. That's how Rabbi Kanievsky is explaining this. So over here, we want to know, wait a second, in general, is Breira going to work retroactively for Doraita things? So that could apply to other things Doraita too, like what about a get? Or what about Kedushin? And, those are going to be Doraita things. Can you have Breira work for a get where you could put some clauses in as if the girl was never, even married in the first place? And basically they're saying, no, there's no Breira. You can't do that kind of stuff. So over here, the sages are basically saying that you have to separate out, Doraita 10% for the Meiser Rishon after the Truma Gadol is separated out. That's Doraita. You owe it. 10%, it's exact. It's not an estimate. And so they're saying if you took out, 2 sa'ah out of 100, out of what's remaining, and, you ate it, and then, or the person ate it, and then you owe another 8, you separate that out after the fact, that, you underdid it, you still owe the other 2. And, over there, in the case of the worker in Demai, he's basically, he has 99 figs, and he has to take out, 10% as Meiser Rishon. But the case over there is going to be different. Why? Because maybe the Am Haaretz did take it out. You're not sure if the Am Haaretz took it out. And so there's a suffix. Maybe the Am Haaretz took it out, and you're just doing an extra tithe. And over here, you're just being careful. It's a rabbinic fence. So that's why they're going to say that, retroactively that designation in Demai took place, whereas over here, this does not take place. So the Gemara is going to finish up, and again, this is a very short one, and it says in the Mishnah's case, the person separated 2 sa'ah of figs before selecting the 8 sa'ah to be rectified, and that's in this Mishnah. And the Gemara is looking at, the cases in which all the produce was destroyed before the selection took place. And the Gemara says that the following matter is obvious. And it says that if the untithed produce in the storeroom was burned or destroyed before the 8 sa'ah of produce is selected, then the truma, in other words, the 2 sa'ah of tithes, is nullified, meaning that it goes back to the tevel state. And the produce that, it was intended to rectify no longer exists. So in other words, the tithes, says Rabbi Kanievsky about this, that were separated on behalf of the 8 sa'ah that were to be identified later, and on selecting the 8 sa'ah, the tithes were to be consecrated retroactively, and since the 8 sa'ah, it's as if it was never identified because it doesn't exist, then the tithes don't become consecrated. So, Rabbi Meir is basically, saying that, even Rabbi Meir would agree that, maybe the 2 sa'ah would remain tevel. Why? Because it doesn't exist. And, again, we're talking about where, it's destroyed. In other words, says the Rosh Shirilio that the tithes were distributed, were not truma but meiser. And the term truma can also be used to refer to meiser. And it could also be like trumas meiser. And what's going to be the position of Rabbi Meir here? So the Gemara says, if, however, the truma and the tithes were burnt or otherwise destroyed before the 8 sa'ah of tevel produce is selected, again, that's a 2-step process. You're doing it as we talked about in the last Mishnah in 4.2, where you're doing one part now and you have the intention you're going to complete it later on, and you took out part of it now, you gave it to some poor people and you're going to finish it, but the problem is the portion that you took out was destroyed, somebody ate it or it got burned. And so they're saying if the truma and the tithes were burnt or destroyed before the 8 sa'ah of tevel produce is selected, then when the produce is selected and eaten, the truma is consecrated retroactively so that the 8 sa'ah is rectified and to be consumed. In other words, Rabbi Meir is saying, and this is the approach by Rabbi Kanievsky, that once the 8 sa'ah of produce is selected in this second step, that it's clarified retroactively that there are 8 sa'ah on whose behalf he originally separated from the tithes, and they've been rectified from that moment. Since the tithing took effect when the tithes were first separated, their presence and the fact that they're absent is no longer relevant. And so, basically, the Gemara is concluding, says the Marafulda, that the designation of tithes does not take effect unless they exist when the produce is eaten. And it seems that, because again, that's what the sages are saying, right? That, if you're going to separate it in 2 steps, the tithe that you're taking out first has to still exist. And fine, Rabbi Meir is going to say that, you can have Breira, and that, even if the first, set of tithes is destroyed before you finish tithing, well, the sages don't say like that. Sages say, the first part you took out is like tevel, it's unrectified. And so it's like you didn't tithe the rest of the pile, and you have to calculate it out for, 10%. And you don't get the benefit of Breira for Deraita things. And that's the point here. And then we're going to get into, on Halacha 3, how do we measure Truma Gedola? Have a great day.